Good day. Thanks for joining our presentation, Getting Started with Neurocom Balance Systems in Service. My name is Mary Ormson. I'm the Global Education Manager for Hearing and Balance with Natus Medical Incorporated. I'm here to help you get comfortable using your Neurocom Dynamic Balance System. This interactive presentation describes and demonstrates the correct procedures for system operations, patient assessment, and includes video demonstrations. It's important to always follow the correct sequence for turning the Neurocom Dynamic System on and turning it off. First, turn on the main power switch, then press the power button on the computer. Within just a few seconds, the system will be ready for use. When shutting down, always return to the main screen and follow the prompts for turning off the system. Choose Shut Down, and once the computer screen is dark, then switch off the main power on the lower right-hand edge of the dynamic platform. As I mentioned, it's very important to follow the sequence correctly. Improper shutdown prevents the surround and the platform from slowly parking in the standby position. If improper shutdown has happened on your system, I'm sure you've noticed it. To prevent your system from shutting down unexpectedly from sudden power loss, you might consider adding a UPS, not a delivery service, but an uninterrupted power supply. You can contact your Natus sales manager for more information to find out about the benefits of adding a UPS to your system. Let's start by talking about the patient population. Who can you test on the Neurocom system? The software analyzes results based on normative data. The normative data for the SOT includes normal subjects weighing between 40 and 300 pounds with a height range of 30 to 80 inches between the ages of 3 to 79 years. Let's look at this picture. What do you think about the lady second from the left, the umbrella-toting senior? This software will prompt you to use the closest data set if your patient's age happens to fall outside of the range. The limits of the system are different than the criteria for the normative data set. The harness can safely support up to 440 pounds. The patient's height should remain below 80 inches due to the physical limits of the surround. Your system has a main menu. You've turned it on. The menu appears on the screen. Settings is your first choice. Under the Settings option, you can add or edit your clinic information, along with many other options as listed on the screen. The next choice on the main menu is Data Analysis. Choosing Data Analysis brings up the folder containing all of your patient's records. Choose a patient, and the options at the bottom of the screen become available. If you choose Share File, you can copy the patient record to an alternate location and mask the name and other identifying information. So we'll do that. When we choose Share, a dialog box appears. Either choose a location for the file or create a new folder by choosing Make Folder on the lower left, and that's what we'll do here. We've named our new folder Shared Files. When you open the file from that alternate location, the Shared File folder, note that the identifying information for the patient is hidden. This identifying information is hidden on all pages of this report. If you have the data analyzer software on your own computer, you can open any Neurocom record for viewing. Otherwise, keep in mind if the file is simply copied and not shared, patient confidentiality might be compromised. Next on the menu are instructions for use. This opens a PDF of the instructional manual. You can go to the menu at the top, go to the File menu at the top left of the screen to print this PDF, or better yet, save it to a flash drive and copy it onto your own computer. The next item, System Init, provides access to the calibration features of the system. File Utilities defines the location for patient records, backup, and so on. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important to return to this main menu when turning off the system. Choose Turn Off System and follow the on-screen instructions. Finally, our last choice on the main menu is Exit to Desktop. When you exit to the desktop, you'll see a few icons. Look for a folder called Neurocom Documentation. I dragged this folder to the center of our screen so we can easily find it. When you open this folder, you'll see 3 subfolders containing clinical and technical documentation and the instructions for use. These are very helpful PDF documents, and some of my favorites are in the Clinical Documentation folder. The Clinical Interpretation Guide is, in my opinion, perhaps the single best resource for you, guiding you through interpretation of the CDP assessment battery, including a section on voluntary motor, limits of stability, and aphysiology. This document is definitely worth a look. As you can see in the table of contents, we have sections on interpretation, SOT patterns, interpreting adaptation, motor control, limits of stability. Charts are included defining the SOT patterns. And there's detailed explanations provided in clear language. Here we see the vestibular and vision dysfunction pattern, which is SOT 4, 5, and 6. And here we see the visual dependent pattern, SOT 2, 3, 5, and 6. Both have clear descriptions, which you'll find throughout this manual. It also includes description of the purpose of each test, as in this example from the adaptation test section. For easy access, you might consider placing this PDF directly on your desktop. Simply right-click and choose Copy. Return to the desktop, right-click, and choose Paste. And there it is. Of course, you can also copy this PDF to a flash drive and have it bound and printed, or you can place it on your own computer, or do both. It's entirely up to you. If you don't have a copy of the Clinical Interpretation Guide on your software, simply email us at ncmadmin@natus.com and ask for the PDF of this Clinical Interpretation Guide. We'll be happy to email it to you. Remember on an earlier slide when we shared a file in the data analysis screen? We shared that file and we put it in the shared folder on the desktop. There's the shared folder on our desktop. When we open that folder, we see files but no names. This is very helpful for sharing interesting cases with your colleagues without compromising patient privacy. Back to the main menu. Choosing Clinical module opens the file cabinet where we can either access an existing patient or we can create a new record. Simply click on an existing patient to access that record, or choose Add Patient to add a new record. You can also find a patient quickly by using the search box at the top of the screen. A few more important points before we get started with the test. As the clinician, you should always use the remote mouse, which allows you to focus your attention on your patient and remain nearby. All patients must wear the harness when being tested in the dynamic system. The harness comes in 3 sizes, small, medium, and large, and you must connect the harness straps tight enough to prevent injury should the patient fall, but loose enough to prevent restricting any patient movement. The harness should be connected to keep the patient safe. You don't want to provide them with additional support. This slide outlines the steps to remember when fitting the harness, but we're going to see a video in a moment. I'm going to start a video now featuring Tom Boismer, one of our clinical integration seminar instructors, demonstrating the steps for proper harness fitting.
Okay, we're here to talk about proper placement of the safety harness. Starting from the top, the harness has the attachment points to the straps on the system, the D-ring adjustments, and the straps that go between the legs. Lou, I'm going to put this on. The shoulder straps fit on sort of like a jacket. Just put your elbow right through there. Easiest way to accomplish it is once you get it on over the shoulders, put the waist belt on second. That will help hold the rest of the assembly in place while you're moving downward to put on the leg straps. It is important as you're placing the harness to get it quite snug, because if the patient does have a fall during the test, if the harness is too loose, it may result in a painful fall, because what will happen as they fall is they'll fall through the body of the harness and be stopped by the lowest point. So once we get the waist belt and leg straps tight, come back up to the top, pull up on the attachment rings, and then pull down on the final shoulder D-ring adjustment straps. Okay. Now as the patient moves from where the position where you put the harness on up onto the platform, the shoulder straps tend to loosen as everything moves into place. So the last thing I do after I get them up on the platform is I lift up here again, and I'll make a final adjustment for a consistent fit. Okay, could you go ahead and step up on the platform for me? Just face the scenery and put your feet over the shapes like you're trying to cover them up. That's fine. At this point, we'll attach the carabiners to the top loops and adjust the straps so that the carabiners are horizontal with the floor. That will give you enough freedom of motion so that the patient can sway throughout their entire limits of stability before the harness will catch them. Because you don't want the harness to catch the patient before they've reached their limits of stability, because then you won't know what their true balance capabilities are. If there's a lot of free play in the remainder of the strap, it's a good idea to put it in through the back so that it doesn't provide additional information to the patient, somatosensory information, as they're swaying back and forth.
Thanks, Tom. That was really helpful information. Now we'll move on to performing the tests correctly. If we're not performing the tests correctly, we're not going to get good data. You have to prepare your patient for successful testing. How much information do you give them during the test? Someone once told me, you can't talk someone out of an impairment. Telling your patient what's going to happen will help them by decreasing their anxiety, and you'll achieve better results. It's okay to reassure the patient frequently during the assessment as well. What about shoes? Should patients wear shoes? Should they not wear shoes? It's best to have shoes off to compare to normative data, but you can leave shoes on if the patient requires it. For example, they wear orthotics in their shoes. Patients should be wearing their shoes for the functional tests on the lung force plate. Be sure they bring the same shoes to retest, and make a note in the comments section after the test so you know what shoes those are. That's helpful for consistency with test-retest. Please note the comment on the bottom of this slide about the motor control test. The motor control test is best completed without shoes for the most accurate latency measurements. How do you position your patient for testing? You read the screen. The screen will give you the positioning instructions determined by the software based on the patient's height. Most of the tests use standard foot placement, but always check the screen just to be sure in case the instructions are different. Help the patient step up onto the platform and then connect the D-rings as soon as they're up on the force plate. Ask the patient to center their ankle over the thick horizontal line and cover the shapes with their feet. Read the screen to be sure where to position the lateral calcaneus to the S, M, or T line. How do you know how tall your patient is when you're creating their record? You should measure them. And you can also roll up the pant leg to allow you to monitor foot placement during testing. Once the patient is positioned and the harness straps are adjusted with the correct tension, pressing Continue will bring you to the center of gravity screen. Ask the patient to stand quietly facing forward, and if the neuroman is not in the middle of the screen, just check foot placement. Only move the patient if your foot placement needs adjustment. We're getting close to our demonstration now. Begin by choosing clinical module, choose Add Patient, and enter the patient information. Date of birth and height are required. Once the required information is entered, choose Continue. This brings you to the main menu. Notice the radio buttons on the left for dynamic conditions, activity-based, and dynamic vision. We'll choose dynamic conditions for the computerized dynamic posturography, or CDP. If I hover the mouse over Assessment, it brings up the contents of the assessment menu. Clicking on Assessment brings me to the selection screen. I'm going to choose the tests in the desired order of completion, in this case, sensory organization test first, adaptation second, motor control third. You can also choose Save as New Suite to save this protocol so you don't have to create it each time you go in to test your patient. So now we're going to get into the software demonstration. Performing the test correctly requires ensuring your patient is positioned properly on the force plate. Always look at the instructions at the top of the screen for correct foot placement. In this case, it tells us to align the medial malleolus to the center horizontal line and the lateral calcaneus to the M line. The lateral calcaneus is the outer edge of the heel bone, not the fleshy part of the foot. I'm going to start now. Using your remote mouse, you press Continue, and then you press Start. Look at the neuroman. Is the patient in the middle? If not, check foot placement. If the foot placement is correct and the patient is standing quietly, don't move the patient to the middle. The position of the neuroman reflects the patient's center of gravity, which is, of course, an important part of your analysis. Click the mouse button again to start testing. In condition 1, the patient has all three senses available for postural stability: vision, somatosensory, and vestibular. Eyes are open, the platform is stable, and when all three senses are available, we predominantly use somatosensory input for balance. Vision is second, and vestibular comes in third. Each trial is 20 seconds long, and even with high equilibrium scores, it's important to do all three trials. But we'll fast forward through trials 2 and 3, and we'll move on to condition 2. In condition 2, the patient is instructed to continue standing quietly, but now with eyes closed. What's the primary input for balance in condition 2? It should be the same as condition 1, somatosensory. With vision removed, the patient should still rely on somatosensory for balance. And if there's no decline in performance from condition 1 to condition 2, what does this tell us? This tells us that the patient was likely not using vision in condition 1, because when we remove vision, postural stability remains high and doesn't change. On the other hand, if the scores decrease in condition 2, that indicates the patient may be relying heavily on vision for stability. Again, it's important to complete all three trials, even when the scores are high, to get the most accurate composite score. In condition 3, the patient is instructed to continue standing quietly with eyes open. Additional instruction might include something like the walls may move slightly during this portion of the assessment. The surround is now sway referenced. That is to say, the walls will move on a 1-to-1 ratio with patient sway. The platform, the support surface, remains fixed, providing the patient with reliable somatosensory cues for balance. What performance would you expect to see in condition 3 if the patient performed well in 1 and 2? You might expect good performance unless the patient is unable to disregard inaccurate visual cues. The visual input the patient receives while swaying forward and back is now unreliable, and they must disregard vision and rely on somatosensory and vestibular. Perhaps you've noticed conditions 1, 2, and 3 have something in common. They all have fixed support. Moving on to 4, 5, and 6, the common factor is now sway referenced support. In condition 4, the platform will move in direct relation to patient sway. On a stable surface, we're able to utilize information from our feet and ankles for postural stability. When the surface is unstable or sway referenced, the somatosensory input is unreliable and the patient must switch to another more reliable cue. Typically, we switch to vision primarily and then vestibular. Condition 4 is more challenging, even for normal performers, as the normative range clearly indicates. Let's look at what happens in this example between trial 1 and trial 2. We see an improvement in the score, likely a learning effect. Even with patients who are scoring outside of the normal range, this learning effect can be a positive sign for rehab potential. Moving on to condition 5, the patient is now instructed to close their eyes. Somatosensory cues remain unreliable with a sway-referenced platform, and vision is absent with eyes closed. In this condition, the only reliable cue for balance and postural stability is vestibular. It's not uncommon for the patient to fall on this first trial. How often in our daily activities do we stand on unstable surfaces with our eyes closed? Not very often. Choose fall and reposition your patient, and then continue. Use your clinical judgment to determine if you should discard or repeat a trial. We've marked this one as a fall, and the patient's performance improves significantly on the second and the third trial. And I'll demonstrate how to go in and repeat a trial. Simply click on the trial you wish to repeat and press Start. Remember, when you repeat a trial, you're tossing out the first results and keeping the second. And the repeated trial will show up on the bar with hash marks. In condition 6, the patient is instructed to keep their eyes open and continue to stand quietly. Both the platform and the surround are now sway referenced. The only reliable cue is vestibular. The score for the second trial is pretty low, and we can repeat it if we want to. It's up to your own judgment. The composite score is still within normal limits. When you've completed all 3 trials, the software will ask you if you want to close the test now. If you say yes, you can't go in and change data. In this case, we'll say no. We'll click on the second trial of condition 6 and repeat that trial, just to show you how to do that. Now we'll close this test. And you can also add comments. And we'll move on to the adaptation test. During this test, the platform rotates upward or downward by 8 degrees. This rotation is randomly repeated 5 times. Instruct the patient to remain standing steady. Press Start and allow the software to move through all 5 trials automatically. What we want to see with this test is the patient's ability to maintain their posture and adapt to the stimulus with an improvement in the response for each repetition. The red or green boxes indicates how much energy the patient needed to maintain postural stability with the rotation of the platform. Typically, the first trial requires more energy, but less energy is required as they adapt to the stimulus. If the patient falls during one of the trials, you have to repeat the entire section, all 5 trials, or not. You could leave the results as is, but if you choose to repeat the fall, you have to repeat all 5. We'll close this test out now and move to the third assessment in the CDP battery, the motor control test. The motor control test measures the long loop postural reflex activity in the nervous system. The patient's instructed to stand steady, and you may tell them that the force plate or platform might move forward very quickly or backward very quickly in small, medium, or large movements. Your job is to stand steady as possible. Always recheck foot placement before starting the motor control test. The green bars represent the average latencies of this automatic reflexive motor response for the 3 trials of the small, medium, and large perturbations or movements. The number within the bars represents a confidence measure. The software has 4 algorithms determining the latency of the response, and a 4 indicates that all 4 algorithms agreed. A 1 is the lowest confidence. Each algorithm arrived at a different latency. For confidence measures less than 4, the latency shown will always be the longest that was measured. In other words, the worst case scenario. When we review the analysis screens, I'll explain when and how to review latencies and remark if necessary. So now we've gone into analysis, and at the top left of the screen you see the word evaluation note. It was grayed out, but once we click on the date, we can choose evaluation note. We can move all tests into the note and create the evaluation note. This report or note includes a short description of each test followed by the results as read by the computer. The report or note is fully editable and can be used by you as a guideline for your own report, as a reference for text or terminology to include in your report. It's up to you. To return to the analysis screen, you simply go back. At the top of the screen, you can see where you get to check mask patient information. If you'd like to print this report quickly without any patient identifying information, you can do so just by clicking Mask Patient Information. Let's have a look at the options that you have for viewing the results. If we click on SOT, under View Options, we see Numeric, Comprehensive, COG Trace, and Raw Data. We're in the Comprehensive screen right now. We can take our mouse and draw a box around any section of this screen to zoom in on it. This is helpful when you're showing results to patients. Just click anywhere on the screen to zoom back out. On this comprehensive page, we see the equilibrium scores, the sensory analysis graph, strategy analysis, and center of gravity alignment. We'll now click on the adaptation test. And this is also the comprehensive analysis for this test. It shows the results of each trial in relation to the amount of energy required to remain steady. It also shows how consistent the responses were in an average of all trials. The motor control test looks at weight symmetry, latency, and strength of response. In each latency bar, you see that number representing the confidence of the latency measurement. When should you review and perhaps remark latencies? Might be a good idea to always review them so that you get comfortable looking at latencies. You can look at one of them. In this example, we'll look at that left one, left latency. We click Mark Latencies, and it brings up the latency marking screen. The green line is the platform movement. The black line is the patient movement. This indicates where the platform moved, and you'll see 2 slopes on that patient movement line. The first slope is the patient riding along with the platform for the initial movement, and the second slope is where that response kicks in. The intersection of the slopes, shown here with the green arrow, is the latency of the response, when that response was initiated. and the software marked this latency at 120 milliseconds. This isn't one that we would typically want to remark on our own, but just for an example, if you want to remark it, you drag that slider button to the left or to the right, and you can see at the top of the screen it changed the latency to 103 milliseconds, and when we update the report, it puts an M in the bar instead of a number, meaning it was manually marked. We made a note that the original latency was 120, and I can change it back to what the computer chose, not by selecting undo, there's not an undo button, but by simply selecting that one again and sliding the bar back to 120 and going into update report. And now it has a 2 in the box again, showing the latency, measure, and confidence that the computer chose. We'll now look at print options. It's important to select everything for your print options, numeric, center of gravity trace, and raw data, because these screens will give you a lot of information about the test. When we click on raw data, for example, we see for each of the 6 conditions the sway patterns and the shear force. Sway is the top line, shear is the bottom line. Shear is that horizontal force exhibited on the force plate when the patient begins to use hip strategy as balance becomes more compromised. Center of gravity trace shows us the quality of the anterior-posterior sway. You might look for circular sway patterns or side-to-side sway patterns if you suspect aphysiologic performance. And that brings our video demonstration to a close. We're now going to move on to our summary. So we've covered powering up and shutting down properly on the system, how to adjust the harness. Thank you, Tom Boismer, for an excellent demonstration. How to correctly position the patient's feet, and what instructions to tell the patient. We talked about the evaluation note, protecting patient information when sharing files, and how easy it is to put your facility information in for your report headers. We've also talked about the process for the SOT, Sensory Organization Test Assessment, Adaptation Assessment, and Motor Control Assessment, the 3 assessments that make up Computerized Dynamic Posturography, or CDP. And it's important to follow all of the directions accurately in order to get the most accurate data. Now I'd like to just draw your attention to our website, balanceandmobility.com. I have some favorite sections of the website that I'll share with you. Under Services, Marketing Your Balance Program, Marketing Downloads, you'll find something called Single Sheet Reports. I love the single sheet reports. These reports cover each of the tests, motor control, adaptation, SOT, limits of stability, and so forth. And the call-out boxes describe each section of the test. Makes a great resource for you. It's very helpful when you're learning about each individual test and what you're looking for. Also under Services, Marketing Your Balance Program, you'll find a section called Facility Sign Up. This is where you can list your facility on our website as a facility that utilizes Neurocom technology. You can also look up other facilities and see who else is in your geographic area that uses the Neurocom system. And finally, I'll draw your attention to the Nerve Center, nervecenter.natus.com. It's here that you'll find recordings of previous e-seminars, announcements for upcoming e-seminars, announcements for live meetings, clinical integration seminars in the U.S. and internationally, and we also have many product demonstration videos. So please visit the Nerve Center, and of course if you ever have any questions, you can email us at ncmadmin@natus.com. Thank you very much.